everybody. So, as you can see, it's just me this week. John is once again out doing a show, making us the big bucks, getting famous and all that stuff. So, you're just going to give me this week. So, we're going to take that opportunity to answer a few questions about Mesoamerican mythology that we had in our queue, because those are my questions anyway, right? So, we'll have John back hopefully soon. He's already called me drunkenly a couple of times talking about how he wants to answer people on the blog, but he doesn't have any good wireless. So, he's thinking about you guys. So we'll jump right into these questions. The first is, why did you strip fertility, sky, water, and epic intelligence from Quetzalcoatl when his description says he's a god of those things? Should there be an unspoken understanding that he is those things that outweighs the fact that there are no stories describing him doing those things? And actually, I have to apologize because that's mostly our fault. Just one thing to note, he does still have sky. That one we didn't take away from him because he is definitely a god of sky, wind, all of that stuff. But we took away fertility, water, and epic intelligence because he really doesn't do those things. And at best, they're like colloquial evidence from Spanish people that didn't really know what they were talking about. And at worst, just kind of made up. I'm pretty sure, for example, the addition of water has to do mostly with rain, which we already know is covered by sky, so there's no reason for that to be in there. Same thing for fertility. But his description until this morning, when I fixed it, did still say things about that stuff. And actually, that's just an accident on our part. We've done a lot of rewrites. Most of the pantheons on the site now we've done rewrites for, except for the Far East, and I know you guys are waiting for them. We know. But when we do those rewrites, we also rewrite the god's description most of the time. But once in a great while, we'll like change it and then forget that we needed to change the god description, or we'll like paste the new associations on top of the old description by accident. So that's all that was. We didn't have the new description up. So that was talking about the old version of Quetzalcoatl, who we don't play with anymore from the original books because it was bad. So, apologize for the confusion. I fixed it this morning. We had that happen once before. Loki's description was still mentioning something about fire when he obviously doesn't have fire. And that's been fixed too. So if you see stuff like that that really doesn't make sense, you can send it in to us as a bug report. Sometimes we'll tell you, oh, that's supposed to be there. It's just one of his minor associations. But, you know, there's a chance that it might just be a mistake. So we're sorry for not being infallible and sometimes being bad at keeping the whole thing updated. To that second question, there usually isn't. There's very rare cases where we'll say, okay, everybody in the world seems to say this guy's associated with this idea, so we're going to give it to him even though we never see him do it. But most of the time we want to see a god do it. If he's not actually out there like causing rain or doing stuff with clouds or what have you, we're not going to give him sky, just because a lot of people are like, we think he might have something to do with sky. Most of the time we want to see it. And if we don't see it, we'll assume, well, either scholars are confused and mistaken, if there's evidence for that, or that might just be that he has some sky, but not all the sky, you know? So it can happen very rarely that we'll say, oh, the understanding that this god does this thing is good enough, even though we don't see him do it, but most of the time we won't do that, so. Our second question is a big old doozy, and says, in comparison between Maya and Aztec culture and myth, which one is more prolific with human sacrifice? And that's actually a really hard question to answer. They're both big on human sacrifice, as we all know, but they emphasize it in different ways. There's a big difference between like what Aztec sacrifice means and does and what Maya sacrifice means and does, even though they have at the base that same idea that you need to give blood to the gods, to the universe, for the greater good of all. And then there's a further layer of difficulty in that, as usual, most of this stuff comes to us from Spanish people who didn't really know what they were talking about, and inflated numbers or made up numbers or just invented barbarities that maybe didn't even happen because they wanted to demonize the local religion. So it's hard to parse through all of that and get a meaningful picture, but we're going to try a little bit for you today. So to start with, there's a heavier emphasis between the two on different aspects. The Aztec sacrifice idea more heavily emphasizes the idea of giving a person's entire life to the gods. You sacrifice an entire person, they die, you burn the bits, whatever. That helps give the gods that precious water that's in the blood that helps keep the universe going. It's very important that they get enough of that, and that if they don't, bad stuff can start happening. If you have a drought, you probably didn't give Tlaloc enough sacrifice. You should get on that. The Maya, on the other hand, have a much heavier emphasis on auto-sacrifice, which is sacrifice of oneself. So it's not lethal sacrifice. You don't die necessarily, although you could. But you do hurt yourself in order to pass that power along to the gods. And so you'll see a lot of imagery of, in Maya carving of people performing auto-sacrifice. The most famous ones are the noblewoman who's pulling the rope of thorns through her tongue. And there are also many, many images of men piercing themselves in the genitals with a thorn or a knife. And actually, I want to do a quick aside to talk about that because it's really cool. One of the reasons that male genitalia sacrifice is so prevalent among the Maya is that, and this is just like piercing it and letting out blood. It's not like cutting the thing off. They still used it. But the idea is that they were trying to become part of this greater idea of divinity in the world and the gods that are part of it. And so they were actually piercing their genitalia in an attempt to imitate women's ability to menstruate, because women have that ability to create, and it's directly tied to their menstruation, of course, which you can figure out even if you're an ancient Maya person. It's not that hard. But men don't. Men are lacking in that. And so by piercing yourself, you're kind of finding a way to do that even though you're male, which is pretty cool. So that's why one of the reasons that idea is so prevalent there. But these things are more prevalent in both, but they're both also there. Like the Aztecs also perform lots of auto-sacrifice. The maguey thorn that you pierce yourself with, even genitalia piercing, a big thing for them also. And the Maya also kill entire people when they need to. It's not like one does one and the other does the other. They both do both of them. There's just different emphasis on them. And then there's also this idea, there's a stronger idea between the two of them of what the sacrifice actually does in the universe. The Aztecs, obviously, are all obsessed with the idea that that sacrifice, the power that comes out of it, is what makes the world tick. It's what the gods use to make sure that the world keeps going. It's what prevents us from having the fifth world fall into darkness and die. It's really important for them because of that. The Maya, on the other hand, they have a little bit of that idea. The gods are sustained by sacrifice. They appreciate sacrifice. But they have a much stronger idea that sacrifice, the act of sacrifice itself, is one of the things that allows you to transcend your mortality, your humanity, to actually make contact with the divine for a moment. Which is why auto-sacrifice is so much more important to them, because when you're killing someone else, you're not really doing anything that transcends yourself. But when you auto-sacrifice, and there's been a lot of scientific discussion of what that really means, like were they high, and that's, they had hallucinations, was just the pain of, piercing yourself through the genitals or the tongue so strong that they had hallucinations and they thought that was why they were being contacted by gods? Was it just religious trance, which people sometimes do, regardless of pain? We don't really know whether they did all of those things or none of those things. We do know that they loved being high. There's a lot of craziness with the Maya religious stuff where they like smoking things and swallowing things and drinking things. There's a crazy ritual thing where they would use balche, I don't remember, which is the honey mead. They would actually use that and perform a douche with it. Sort of like, kids these days in the schools would use maybe an alcohol-soaked tampon because it would like immediately get it into your tissues and make you drunk. Stuff like that. They were very dedicated to this idea of we need to hit religious ecstatic visions through our sacrificial rituals. And so you'll see that a lot, where the goal of the sacrifice is to give that power to the gods, but it's also so that I, as a person, can connect with the gods, can contact the gods, can, be part of that and learn from it. So you have a very different flavor in the two sacrifices, even though both of them do the same kind of sacrifice and they're both incredibly important to them. You couldn't take either kind of sacrifice away from either one of them and have it, make any sense or describe either culture well. They both do both. They both do them for multiple reasons, but it's a little bit different in each case. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing or random or roundabout. What I'm saying is that you can't divorce sacrifice, blood sacrifice, from either the Aztecs or the Maya, and you can't say it's more important to the Aztecs than it is to the Maya. It's incredibly important to both of them, and just because they don't do it exactly the same way doesn't mean that it's more important for one than the other. And of course, your normal Spanish disclaimer, the Spaniards probably lied about a lot of this stuff, and we just don't have any information that we can look at to tell us about it. So, when they say, oh, the temple of Quetzalcoatl killed 10,000 men in one day, that probably didn't happen. That's too many people. They probably didn't have that many people. That would be insane. So that probably didn't happen. So there's a lot of inflation of the numbers of people that were killed. Or, when they say, well, the Maya performed these ridiculous rituals where they all got completely fucking high and stabbed each other. Probably not. It was probably a lot more ritually connected than that. There were probably specific things they were doing that the Spaniards played up to in order to be like, look at how ridiculous this devil-worshipping cult is. But there's grains of truth at the bottom of those. If you're really interested in it, kind of sift through what you can find. There's actually some good papers on the internet, and also, of course, books about sacrificing those things are great. it's a big subject, so I can't really do it justice in just a couple of minutes, but there's a quick snapshot for you. So, third question, somebody says that they love our Maya write-up. Thank you, guys. But they have a question about the PSP. For the Unici Chupla, Utzil Keban, Caan, and Sucun Palil boons, what are the options for characters that want to embody a between state instead of one or the other? Like someone who wants to be a hermaphrodite, who wants to be middle-aged, who wants to be a child that is also very wise. It seems like these boons don't allow for an in-between. And you're actually right. These boons do not allow for an in-between. And it's not because we're trying to punish you or we didn't think about it. It's more because these boons are, like every PSP, meant to represent the religious and cultural mindset of the ancient Maya. And the ancient Maya are not concerned with the in-between. So that's why you see that. In ancient Maya religious stuff, you'll get gods that are old, you'll get gods that are young. You will not get gods that are randomly indeterminate. It just doesn't happen. In the same way, like, it's certain that they knew what a hermaphrodite was. They probably had them occasionally occur, but they were never going to make a god that was a hermaphrodite. You'd have male and you'd have female, because those are the two important ideas that they would know. It's sort of like they would assume these are the opposing forces of the universe. You can have things in the middle, but those are aberrations. They're not things that are represented by the gods that are represented by the universe on purpose. So they're not going to make a disposition for a hermaphroditic god. They don't exist as far as they're concerned. You could have a male god, you could have a female god. They could switch between them, but male and female are different things. And they're never going to say, well, this god's both male and female at the same time, because that's a concept that wouldn't really make sense to them. So that's why you're seeing these boons that give you one or the other, but not both options. And that's why it's not easy to work with a character concept that wants to be in between. I would say you can still do it. It's just that you're going to sometimes not be able to get the benefit of your PSP. For example, if you want to play a wise child, then you're going to probably want to play in the youthful aspect of Sucun Palil, and you're just going to have to buff up your intelligence by yourself, like everybody else. It's not actually a penalty to you, because it's not like most people have that bonus to intelligence. It's only going to be a penalty in comparison to other Maya gods who are using it as an aged aspect. But you're making a choice to play against type for your religion, and that's totally cool. You can do that as much or as little as you want to, because you're a new Scion, and the fact that the ancient Maya thought that, you know, there was no in-between in genders and they had strict sex roles, you don't have to do that, because you're a new person, and you're in a new culture, and you're in a new time, and you can do whatever the hell you want as the new god. But it does mean that when you're using ancient powers, they aren't always going to work with you, and that when you make those choices to break the mold, to really become something new, it's going to sometimes be a little more difficult. Similarly, you could be a hermaphrodite, but when you do that, your Unici Chupla is just not going to work, because you're not being male or female, or if you wanted to have no sex at all, same thing. You could definitely do that, use your shape-shifting powers, do it all you want, but that boon isn't going to help you. What I would say for that, some storytellers might actually decide that if you're going to be a hermaphrodite that is both, you could just pick one of the two aspects and have it, because you're being both, so obviously one is on. I would probably say you get neither, because those boons are very much about you can pick a strict sex and stick with it, and that's what they would be envisioning for a god that did that, so they would be like a hermaphroditic god, what is that? But, as always, you have the flexibility to switch between them, so you can always be hermaphroditic most of the time, and then when you need it at crunch time, switch to female, or switch to male, or whatever. And the same thing for the ones that are switching between your ages, or switching between your positive, negative aspects, whatever. It's not there to be punishing to say to you, you can't be a line crosser, you can't be something that is more than one thing. It's just saying you're coming from a culture that doesn't do that. So if you're going to be that trailblazer, you do it and you be awesome. But it will be a little more difficult than if you were following traditional roles. Which is the case for most people in Scion. You know, if you're an Aesir Scion and you don't want to be a giant, well, your TSP isn't going to do a lot for you. Or if you're a tthe Scion and you don't want to be dealing with geisha, your PSP is not going to do a lot for you. You're coming from, this is my traditional culture's views on the world, and those are where its special powers come from. So if you don't want those special powers, or those special powers don't work quite right, you either find a way to work around them or ignore them. But they're not going to change because they're part of that ancient culture's mindset. So, I wish I had something more awesome to tell you there, but really I think that you can get a lot of really neat mileage out of how do you as a modern person with this modern idea that doesn't fit the PSP make it work for you, or not, and what does that mean for you? And what does it mean for you in regards to the other gods in your pantheon who are going to be maybe a little confused about why you want to have no sex, like what does that even mean, you know? So that's going to be pretty neat. Good luck. And then the final question is, I have a question regarding sun and moon among the Maya. Who ultimately controls the sun and moon amongst them? Is it Unici or Aulish, or is it the hero twins? Which is, of course, Hunaku and Spalanke. And both pairs seem to have power over the celestial object, so I was curious. And the answer is both. It depends really on where you are and what you're doing. Like, the hero twins are a super ridiculous big deal, especially in Guatemala, versus Unici and Awalish kind of are more important maybe up in the central Mexico area, not as much in the southern. But they're both still important in both places, and their associations with sun and moon don't go away just because you move geographically. A lot of pantheons have more than one sun god. You know, the Egyptians are rocking both Horus and Ra and Sekhmet. Like, there's a lot of people doing sun over there. Doesn't mean that like one of them does sun and the other two just sit around. It just means that there's different levels of what being associated with a purview means. I'd say in terms of actually like carrying the sun around and doing stuff with it, I would probably point to Unici and Awalish for the moon. The hero twins definitely are associated with those things. They actually become and embody those things at the end of their myth. But they don't do a lot in terms of, like, you don't have stories of, like, them ferrying them through the skies or specifically doing things to protect them. It's more they're associated with those things, they're part of those things, but they're not actively doing those things. Hey, kind of call back to our first question, right? Where somebody's super associated with something but doesn't actually do it. That's these guys. Unici, on the other hand, carries the sun on his back through the underworld every day and then brings it back up to the sky. He's obviously doing that same kind of thing that you have when you have a Ra or an Apollo. And Awalish doesn't move the moon around specifically, but she is in charge of its phases, which is basically the same thing for moon gods. So I would say if you're looking for somebody to be like who is specifically driving the celestial objects right now, I would use Unici and Awalish. Their specific jobs are be the sun and moon gods. The hero twins are associated with the sun and moon strongly, and you shouldn't take that away from them, but they also do a lot of other things. So it's more like Horus, who he is associated with the sun, but he's not the guy who's really the most in charge of the sun. He's just doing sun as well as a bunch of other stuff because he's really the god of kingliness and war and all that. So the hero twins are gods of cleverness, gods of fertility and magic, and they also do sun and moon. And that's okay. You can have gods doing the celestial objects. More than one god in the same pantheon can do them. It's not a big deal. So I think that there's not really a conflict there. It's just about how you want to represent both of them doing those things. And that's all the Mesoamerican questions that I have for today. I actually wanted to mention that somebody sent in a question saying, hey, do more story time. We get a few of those every now and then. I am totally happy to do story time for you guys, but I would love it if you would send in some kind of guidance about what kind of story time you're looking for. Like, when you just say do story time, there are so many myths from so many cultures. We're talking about every story told by people everywhere in the world ever. That is a lot of stories. I don't know how to pick between them. So when you feel like some story time, if you want to ask and say, hey, could you do some story time about this culture or this god or about this kind of idea, that would be super helpful, and that will get you some story time faster than me trying to go, which one of these 90 billion stories am I supposed to tell today? So I think that's about it. We're working on the same projects. John wants me to tell you all the industry is really hard and he hates you for making him do it, especially Thomas. So you've got John's hatred, but he is still thinking about you. And we're enjoying watching the new polls go up, seeing some surprising upsets there. And hopefully we will get back to you. And the people that keep asking, we've got like 5 people who are like, hey, where's that character creation outline you were going to put up? It's almost done. We're working on it. Give us a second. I know I said we were going to put it up a little while ago, and that was my bad. I'm always a lot more optimistic about when we're going to put stuff up than John is, because I'm all like, let's do it right now, and John is like, no, 90 things I need to get done first, so please blame my enthusiasm, I'm sorry. We will try to get that up as soon as possible. We need to go over a couple more things on it before it's ready to go, but hopefully you'll see that soon. We're working on industry. I'm still taking a little bit of a break from new pantheons right now, so I haven't started the Polynesians yet, but we are trying to get some more fiction done. We did some good work on like outlining and making sure the whole universe makes sense and all that. So there'll be more stories soon for those of you that care about that. And I think that is all I have got to tell you this week. So we'll see you next week, hopefully with John. And that's it for us today.